Mark, great to see you. Thanks for joining the Piscari Insights video series. Delighted to have you here. Really enjoyed our chat the other week and looking forward to talking through everything about podcasts. But first of all, let's kind of introduce yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Hey, Mike. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on to the interview. I'm looking forward, especially after our chat. I think we had quite a lot of ideas of things to talk about. So I was really looking forward to it. My name is Mark Colgan. I'm the co-founder and chief revenue officer at a company called Speak on Podcasts. We mainly help B2B brands and technology companies speak on podcasts, so leveraging the audience of other people's podcasts to spread their message and increase their brand reputation. I'm from the UK originally, but I live in Lisbon, Portugal, and I've worked in the B2B Sales and Marketing space for the last several years, and have more recently started the agency Speak on Podcasts in June 2020, so during the middle of a pandemic, which some people might say is not great timing, but it's been great to have and grow the team to 16 people and be paying payroll and having people live good lives off the back of the work that we're doing. So yeah.
I didn't realize you got 16 people so quickly. Well done.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. It's a people-based business, so there's always additional admin that comes with hiring and training and onboarding, but that's the key. If you can nail that and you've got a repeatable service that you can deliver, then you're off to the races.
Exactly. Brilliant. Okay, so let's get into the questions. So, yes, the first one was kind of, why has podcasting doubled in the last year? And is it more than just COVID related?
I think it's a combination of COVID related and also just the medium picking up more traction. I think if you see the moves that companies like Spotify have made, as well as Google investing in podcasts as well, they've obviously seen that trend as well. Now, just for some stats, there's actually over 2 million podcasts as of today. And as of April, so this month when we're recording this particular episode, there's 48 million episodes, which is an incredible amount of podcasts. And a lot of people might say, well, is it too late? And I certainly don't think it is, which I think we'll get into later. But, COVID did force brands to rethink and adjust about how they can reach their audience, especially those brands that were relying on field marketing and in-person events and exhibitions. Yeah. Some of these exhibitions are incredibly expensive. So they've either repositioned to create their own podcast or speaking on others as well. I also feel that there's more of an understanding that brand is more important than ever, especially as software and services become a commodity. I'm very much involved in the sales and marketing space, so I think of Gong versus Chorus. They're two softwares that, their marketing team won't like me to say they do the same thing, but the outcome that they help me achieve is the same. Outreach and SalesLoft, again, sales enablement tools, they both have different bells and whistles, but they help me do the same thing. And it's really those companies that are investing in their brands and getting their name out there, who are winning and will continue to win. And then lastly, which I don't think is COVID related, podcasting is all about storytelling, and it's the perfect medium for doing so. Since 30,000 BC, we've been drawing paintings on caves. In 1909, the first radio transmission was shared with spoken word. And it's all about that human connection. And no matter how advanced the technology gets, people still buy from people, and they buy from those that they know, like, and trust. And speaking on podcasts is just a great way to build those deep relationships with your future customers.
Brilliant. So what an excellent intro into this kind of session, and which leads us into kind of the next question about, so how should B2B businesses use podcasts as a business development tool? And I'm talking about kind of guests versus should they have their own, just listen then outreach, kind of, is it worthwhile? Is there an ROI? And how long should you wait? Because there's a big thing about the problem with things like podcasting and content marketing is you really have to be in it for the long run. If you think there's a quick return, you're in the wrong game. And it's really hard to kind of hold out and say, it's working, I'm going to stick at it. So what's your view?
Yeah. So I watched a video from actually one of our customers on LinkedIn today, where he's in fat loss and nutrition coach, and he was talking about there's just no such thing as quick wins. If you want to lose weight, eat less, move more. I'm sorry, but you're just not going to lose weight tomorrow. If you did want to lose weight in a month, then don't eat for a month, but you might die. Another quick way to lose weight is cut off your leg from your hip. That will help you shed a fair few kilos, but it's not really it's not sustainable. And I think the more and more brands and marketers out there are starting to think a little bit more long term. Now, interestingly, that the question is about business development, which I believe is different to lead generation. Business development can also encompass things such as partnerships, as well as as well as exploring strategic initiatives when it comes to developing the business. So if you are maybe an agency or a smaller business and you're trying to decide, is it worth doing your own podcast or guesting on others? I do have a bit of a biased answer. The quickest way is to guest on others, but I'll dive into starting your own podcast. It's never been easier to do that and create your own podcast, and it allows you to build your own authority on a channel that you control as well, because it's your medium, you're sharing that content. And it also will enable you as the business owner to connect with other thought leaders and potential customers. It's a great opportunity to start that conversation with an ideal customer or people that also solve other problems for your customers as well. Yeah. I think playing that long game is also removing your company and your business from being the hero, and really your customer's the hero. And it's very unlikely that your product or service solves every challenge that your prospect has. So connect with other people that help solve other issues that they have in their businesses, whatever the industry that it is that you serve, and use that as a way to just provide value to your audience. And as we discussed before, it gives you plenty of content. I've worked in a lot of companies where I've struggled to create content. One of the companies I used to run the marketing for was a data center design and build company. They did amazing stuff, but a lot of it was actually quite confidential because the data centers, Experian and ARM, the chip manufacturer, they didn't want to. I couldn't say, well, here's the blueprint of this amazingly efficient data center that we just built. Or exactly where they are. I know we're going off topic. I worked for Experian and went to see their data center, and they've got a moat around it. It's amazing that industry once you kind of dive into it. But they could, for example, if podcasting had been more popular back then, they could have spoken to other data center design and builders and just talked about the efficiency and lots of different topics. You could break down your whole content strategy and use podcasting as the main way to create the content, and then speak to other people to help answer those questions. But the quicker way, and if you're not sure and you just want to test out the water with podcasting, because it isn't for everybody, you can guest on other people's podcasts, and that really helps you leverage the audiences that other people have already built, and it also allows you to build those relationships with the hosts and explore potential partnerships as well that could come out of it, because if they serve the same audience, then they're going to be driving a lot of demand and conversations from people that you may want to sell to or work with in the future. And thirdly, the content piece again. Speaking on a podcast for 30 minutes gives you tons of content that you can repurpose into hundreds of different pieces of content.
I mean, really interesting discussion about, I was talking to a guy about 3 or 4 weeks ago in the States, and we were talking and reminding ourselves about owning your marketing assets versus renting your marketing assets. And he had quite a big thing, rightly so, about, the more of the marketing assets you can own, the less susceptible you are to the algorithm. Mm-hmm. And I think, if we own our podcast content, if we do more organic, which takes longer, we focus on content marketing as a strategy. We build our email lists. All of that is building our own marketing assets that we own that we can control. Whereas the more advertising we do, you're renting the asset, basically. What's your kind of view, just like broadly, on that kind of problem of owning versus renting?
Yeah, I would always want to own. We haven't prepared
it, but just
no worries. I would always want to own as much as I can. I live in an Airbnb or a rented apartment. I'm not going to fit a brand new kitchen in here because I'm going to move on in about 6 months' time. So I really want to build on the land that I own myself. So that is the email list, that is creating content, that is the longer term picture, because no matter what the channel or distribution, it's still me and my company or my brand that I'm investing in. I gave a talk about podcasting before, And we talk about paid ads. Yes, they're a great channel to acquire new customers, but as soon as you stop spending any money on paid ads, you have no more customers coming through. So build for the long term is always my ethos, and has been before I was even in the world of podcasting.
Yeah, and we definitely share that, Mark. I would completely agree. So let's kind of talk now about sort of how should you think about audience size, demographics, when you're kind of researching podcasts to appear on. Because what I've noticed unusually is it's really hard to find any data about podcasts. So what do you do? How do you pick? How do you find out?
Yeah, it's for me, it's all about the relevancy. And relevancy is much more important than the size. We're in a position where we speak to hundreds of podcast hosts on a weekly and monthly basis. And we do ask for the podcast hosts what their audience size is. Now, it's a very dangerous question to ask because some hosts can be very protective, and it's like we've just asked them how old they are or how much they weigh.
Yeah.
People can be protective about that. And also, not every host has a clear picture of exactly who their audience is or their numbers. And that's something you never want to be in a position where you're asking questions where people feel uncomfortable answering because they don't know the answer. So we tend to avoid looking at just the audience size, and we think about relevance. For demographics, we're thinking niche. We think the niche, the better. And we would much rather have 200 very relevant listeners listen to a podcast episode versus a very broad audience of 20,000 people. Of course, there's going to be some people in each of those podcasts that might be listening that could be a good fit for you, but you'll hit more home runs when you've got those smaller, well-refined podcast audiences that are hoping to learn something new by listening to that show. So looking at the previous interview topics and the guests that they've had on the show in the past can give you a good feeling as to who is the audience that the podcast host is serving. And lastly, another thing that I mentioned to a lot of our customers and speak about this a lot is that you can't compare podcast audience size to other metrics such as landing page visits or website visits. It's like an apples and oranges comparison. So forget size and go for relevancy is the short answer.
And so interesting when about the kind of relevancy is because I try and appear on podcasts. I've got a target this year of appearing on 24 in the year, and I've done about kind of 5 or 6 so far, and I keep going. But the problem I find is that doing the research is like finding out which ones are relevant, because there's, as we just said at the beginning, 2 million podcasters out there. How on earth do you kind of hone it down? Any tips to people that are listening and watching that are thinking of becoming guests? Where do you start looking? What do you do? What are the practical things?
Yes, so I always say to think about the audience that you want to speak to. So imagine you went to a conference and you're on stage and there was 500 people, 100 people, 500 people, 10,000 people in front of you. Who is making up that audience? Who are the type of people? What businesses do they work in? What markets are they in as well? And think about where you can find those online. Now, the great thing is in the world that we live in today, there's dozens, if not hundreds of software providers that serve the same market and audience that you do. So I would think if I'm trying to reach SEO people, and one of the search engine optimization softwares that's very popular is called Ahrefs, I would then go and look to see if Ahrefs has been on any podcasts that are specifically talking to the SEO audience. Have a look to see where they've gone, because if they've already appeared on the podcast or if they're sponsoring a podcast, then they've made a decision and an investment in that channel and in that particular podcast. So that would be one place to start. And then you can just take that a step further and think, well, if it's not software companies or other companies, what influencers are also talking to the same audience as you? And then share, and then go and look for the podcast that they've been on as well. And even a keyword search is close enough to help you find the topics that you can talk about.
Great. And also, what do you think of these new emerging platforms that are kind of matching platforms? They will match you as a guest to podcast hosts. And then they're often free, but as we know in this world, nothing's free. So are they high quality? Is there a catch? Again, if people are looking at those, what would you recommend?
I'm not going to sit here and say that they don't work. They do. They certainly work, especially if you're just starting out and you've got the time to go through all of those and have a look. What I've noticed when I look at it for myself and across our customer campaigns, that a lot of the podcasts that are on the matchmaking websites might be slightly newer and smaller in terms of audience size. So they're just getting started. Also, what we do at Speak on Podcast is context. That's everything that we do. Just because it's a marketing podcast talking about marketing to marketers, it doesn't mean that actually that's the best use of your time. We had one customer who wanted to speak to C-level marketing executives. Now there's thousands of marketing podcasts, but there's actually only a handful of C-level podcasts for marketing executives. So just because it's matching you based on AI, which is just keyword matching, that's about my cynical take on it. But it's just keyword matching, and just because the keyword matches, it doesn't mean it's going to be a great fit for you and worth your time and investment. But by all means, if you're just starting out, do it. I think there's no harm in trying. It's just how much do you value your time, and how much time do you have to start using those platforms.
Well, I think that's a really important point about the value of time. Yeah, if you're an agency and you're 20 people and you're the agency leader, and you're thinking that yes, appearing on podcasts is a good strategy for building brand awareness, is it a good use of the chief exec's time to go online and spend half a day a week researching podcasts and doing the outreach? No, it's not. Better to have a managed service that does it instead. So I think valuing your time versus the kind of return, and how you pitch, because as I've learnt, pitching to a podcast host is very different than pitching to a client or doing anything else. And the way that you do that, has a positive or negative effect on the success rate. Something else I've learnt, by the way, just as we're kind of like finishing off this episode,
no worries.
I built a media pack. So I say me and my marketing person built a little media pack. Really simple about who I am, what I specialise in, why you talk to me, and it lists all the podcasts I've been on and the books that I've been involved in. And it's amazing how that simple Google Doc, it's well put together, it's professionally made by Susie, who I work with. It makes a massive difference because you look more credible all of a sudden.
You certainly do, and we saw that in the industry that we serve. So there's a number of guest booking agencies out there. They all produce these PDFs and one pages or media packs. We wanted to take it a step further and include more rich media. So we actually create a landing page for every customer that we work with, which has the same information, but we embed some of the previous interviews so they can actually hear what Mike sounds like rather than having to click and then listen to it. We also record a video, which is usually myself or the co-founder, just running through the bio, the topics, and some of those real human things that you can't really read in text. So one of our clients lives in Hawaii. He's got 3 children and his wife over there. He runs 3 businesses and still manages to find the time to go hiking in Hawaii. So we didn't put that on the page, but we spoke about that when we talked about our customer, because we're connecting humans at the end of the day. And if somebody wants to go to Hawaii or they've just been to Hawaii, that's the little difference that working with a company like us and the way that we present it can really benefit from.
And just like kind of bringing it all together. So in kind of like, kind of 1 or 2 sentences, just kind of like your advice to particularly agencies that are thinking of starting podcasts or being on podcasts. What are the kind of 2 or 3 things you'd say to them?
Yeah, so and I think this kind of will cover like what's the ROI of podcasting, because that's a question that gets asked quite a lot.
Absolutely.
You need to remember that almost, I think it's close to 70% is the latest stat of the B2B's buyer's journey is completed before a prospect ever reaches out to a salesperson. And if you have gated content, for example, on your website, the majority of people probably aren't accessing that information. So you can use podcasts to build awareness throughout the entire buyer's journey by showing up when they're doing that research. And then another thing to think about as well is that it's an incredibly intimate experience to listen to the CEO or to the agency owner talk about the successes, the failures, all of the mess ups that have happened and the lessons learned. I think a lot of companies forget that they're in a very unique position where they get to see and they have insights into how multiple companies are doing or achieving or overcoming certain things. And that's really unique insight. So I guess that's also, don't be afraid if you don't think you have anything to say. You definitely do. That's on the more psychological side of things. But there was another stat that came out recently that 75% of people listen to the full episode of podcasts that they're subscribed to. So if you have a 30-minute interview and 200 people download that and listen to it, now 200 people doesn't sound like a lot, but then 75% of people stay until the end, so they listen to the full thing.
Yeah.
That's 150 people listening to the full interview, which actually is 4,500 minutes of airtime. That's an incredible amount of an incredible valuable touch point that you can have with your ideal audience, and you're not even trying to sell to them, because no one likes to be sold to, but we all love to buy.
Absolutely. And that's great, Mark. And I think it is, it's never too late. When's the time to start? Well, maybe like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like Pat Flynn did 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean now isn't a good time, because what we didn't cover also was the drop-off rate of podcast hosts' survival is really high. Like, I think, there's a huge number of podcast hosts who don't get past episode about 10 or 12 because it's too hard. And so there's always churn in podcast land, is what I'm finding. And new ones spring up all the time.
Yeah, and it's not hard to outwork an existing podcast as well. So say there's 2 podcasts in your niche or in your industry already, and they're producing content once a month. Well, you can record once a week, and you've 4 times the amount of content you're producing. And let's not forget what you can do with that content. You've got it to repurpose, give that to your marketing team, use it in your sales enablement. And we spoke about this before, Mike. I use the interviews that I speak on and share it with people that are in our pipeline, or people that we're reaching out to as cold prospects. It's more like, hey, here's me talking about the benefits of podcasting, and if it sounds like it's something that you'd be interested in, let us know. There's so many. I don't think we have time to cover everything that we can do with podcasts, but there's so much more than just the interview. I think that's the important takeaway.
Brilliant. And Mark, thank you ever so much for coming along. Really enjoyed this session. Where can people find out more about you?
Sure. So you can find out more about Speak On Podcasts at speakonpodcast.com. And if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm Mark Colgan. And if you just let me know that you heard me through the Piscari podcast, that would be great.
Very good. Excellent, Mark. Thank you much indeed. Really kind of you to be on this session for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. Take care.